Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Motivate Property Podcast. It is Wednesday, the 8th of October, 2025. Hope everyone out there is having a fantastic week. So guys, this week we are talking about digital IDs, right? And the impending future of the digital infrastructure being implemented across really the world, right? Now, I'm going to do a little bit of a deep dive into digital IDs. This is obviously a very hot topic at the moment. I've had a lot of people reach out to me with their concerns of digital IDs, and obviously I can certainly understand the concern. I've got my own concerns, which I'm sure we'll get into today. Having said that, and really where this relates into property, and keep in mind, guys, this is the same conversation in the same line of thinking around the future of politics in the country as well, and for that matter, not just the country, more so the Western world, right? Obviously, there are a lot of moving parts when it comes to the overall economy, and obviously property in Australia is a huge asset. It's incredibly important. I've got the hope and I've got the outlook that property investment will continue, and I don't see a reason why that will change. However, a lot of the concerns that people are sending to me around digital IDs, that's kind of the concern that they're really speaking to fundamentally, is the fact that long term, the way that the government's being run, particularly in the Western world, as things get, heading towards that kind of socialist, environment, there could be a risk that this is just that tipping point, digital IDs, that for that matter, of being that tipping point that's going to essentially start setting the market into a negative spiral, right? Not quite there. Don't quite buy into that yet, and I think there are a few other things to consider, but that's kind of really where I want to sort of get to today. So without further ado, let's get stuck into it, right? So firstly, I think I want to start this conversation off a little bit blunt, right? Now, this is a lot of the conversation right now, digital ID, and really a lot of the fear coming around digital ID is really coming from the world, I think it was the World Health Organization a couple of weeks ago. There was Keir Starmer, so the Prime Minister of the UK, had essentially announced, in this kind of globalist environment, that basically by the end of his term, they will have digital ID completely implemented across the UK. So it's called the Brit Card, only for those people who want to essentially work in the UK. Right. So in other words, they're essentially enforcing digital IDs, and it's a mandatory scheme that they want to implement, countrywide. Now, obviously, that has sent a lot of people into some fury, right? So there are some people, and a small percentage of people, who think that this is a great thing, it's convenient, it's the future, it is what it is. There's a big chunk of people, particularly the guys that I've been sort of, who've been sending me stuff, who think that this is the beginning of the end, right? And again, I can completely appease and sort of understand that perspective. Now, with that said, I think the first, I guess, kind of concern that people have when it comes to digital IDs is the fact that conspiracy theorists have been talking about this for years. It was always one of those things that, oh, you're a crazy person, go wear a tinfoil hat and so on and so forth. Now in 2025, the fact that the UK government has essentially come out and said that they are doing this whether you like it or not, and it is mandatory. I think for the most part, most of the people who have concerns have had concerns for years, and this is the exact thing that they've been concerned about, is the fact that the government's just going to make you do it whether you like it or not, right? Now, obviously since COVID, and since, the way that the government has unfolded since COVID, I think it has changed a lot of people's view about the government, its function, what it does, the benefits, the costs, the risks, and all the things that kind of come with that. So I think the first thing to really kind of deal with here is the fact that, once again, the tinfoil hat wearers were correct. Now, is that a good thing or a bad thing? Probably a bad thing in the grand scheme of things, right? Because if there are a chunk of people online and in the world who can sort of predict this, it kind of says something, and it actually kind of says a lot of things. Having said that, for the people who are here in Australia and have this concern, I have some bad news for you. It's not coming. It's here. And it's been here for a while, right? It's called MyGov, or My ID here in Australia, right? So we have a slightly different version of it. It's still the same digital ID infrastructure. It's still the exact same parameter. Guys, we already have it here in Australia. And as much as we want to sit here, and I've heard the arguments all week, as much as we want to sit here and resist it and fight it and not comply and all the X, Y, and Z that we're planning on doing here in the country, guys, it's already here. It's been here for I mean, I've had to be using digital ID, like my government ID, for over a year as a director of multiple companies. And again, it's something that you're forced to do if you want to own businesses, right? So I've had to sort of, sign up to it a long time ago. And for the last year, 18 months, I've been using it pretty much on a daily basis. In fact, when I had to redo my firearms license, I had to use my digital ID. When it comes to Medicare, when it comes to taxes, it's all inside your digital ID. So I think, and this is again part of the first part of this conversation, the idea that you can sit here and resist this, I think right now resistance is futile because it's already here. The question now becomes is how is it implemented, and how do we as a people want it to be implemented? That's really, I guess, the real question right now. So what I want to do firstly is just talk about digital ID. What is it? I want to talk about the pros, I want to talk about the cons, and I want to talk about the concerns that people have, right? And again, not to say that this is going to change anyone's mind or save the world. It's certainly not. It's just going to give you guys as listeners potentially some more things to think about when it comes to how you want this for you and your life, right? So firstly, digital ID simply is a system at which a person's identity can be verified or authenticated electronically rather than having paper documents. So at the moment, I recently went to the US. I had to use my paper, passport. I've got my card driver's license. I've got my Medicare card. You take your wallet. You got to have all these different cards and all these different things to use when you go overseas. So the whole point of digital ID, you're not going to need any of that in theory. You're going to need, your phone, and your phone will have your ID. It'll have your passport, your driver's license, your Medicare card, your banking cards. It's going to have everything all in the one app. You just show that one thing, and all of a sudden you can get through the border, right? So that's what they're really talking about in theory. Now, it often includes credentials, so things like tokens. That's your authenticator, so making sure that your phone knows that's actually you who's logging into your phone. Biometric data, so things like your face, things like your fingerprint. Not going to get into bloods and blood types, but biometric data that's obviously unique to you. And then same with things like digital certificates. So very similar to the COVID like vaccine passport that we had implemented. When you go onto your phone, you'll have that little green card, something like that to say, hey, yep, this is authenticated, it's legitimate, you are who you say you are, and then the government can then start using that as a means of issuing you a new driver's license, or you going to the bank and using that ID to get your bank statements or withdraw money or whatever the case is. Now, In terms of the infrastructure, like most of it's pretty much here, right? And like I said, we can sit here and resist digital IDs, but it's already here. I think for the most part, we can get a little bit carried away in terms of, vilifying or making it better than what it really is. At the end of the day, digital ID is simply infrastructure. It's a framework. I don't think that infrastructure or a framework can really be good or bad until it's used by a particular person with a certain intent, right? So in other words, it is what it is. It's a system, right? I think the system itself isn't inherently bad. I think the way that it can be used in the future can be used quite positively or negatively, right? And this is kind of really what we've got to speak to when it comes to the concerns. Now, in terms of the benefits, so the first benefit is the fact that it is going to provide a convenient solution for people, right? Now, when I say convenient solution, having a digital ID means you won't have to carry multiple cards, you won't have to carry your wallet, you won't have to carry, all these different means of identification, and, you've got to have 100 points of ID, so passports, driver's licenses, Medicare cards, bank statements, and, your home rates. You should be able to go down to the Department of Transport, have your digital ID, and then be able to verify your ID in one click, you're done. All right. So that's kind of the main intention of it. All right. Having access to government services, reducing the paperwork, and speeding up verifications, that's the point of the efficiencies. In theory as well, it's also designed to reduce fraud and theft with paper documents. So again, for some people, when they have got, multiple passports and birth certificates and things like that, they keep them in a safe at home. The reason why it's in a safe, because if it's stolen, people can copy it, manipulate it, and screw you over, steal your identity. So the point is, if it's online in the app, in theory, it can't be stolen like a piece of paper that's just sitting out somewhere, and therefore less risk, right? So they're really fundamentally the benefits. Now, when I plugged this data into ChatGPT, wanted to find out, really what are all the benefits of digital ID. They were talking about things like, there's better service and inclusion to services, real-time updates. There's things like, it can stop you from oversharing information. So let's just say, for example, you're at the Department of Transport and they say, what's your name? You've got to say, my name is Corey Jones. Like, just the fact that you've got to voice that in public, people around you can technically steal your information. Again, don't know how much of that actually happens out there, but that's something that I guess it could be a benefit for sure. Better control and traceability of your information. And it's also keeping things modern in the modern world. And as we head towards this digital future, it's just a part of that digital future, right? So again, I can definitely see the benefits. However, when it comes to the concerns, right, and this is, I guess, sort of where we have to be a little bit realistic in the way that the technology can be used. And this is where I'm saying, I don't think right now inherently it's a bad thing. The way it can be used can definitely be a bad thing for us, right? And so this is where it comes from. So the concerns that people have had that I've spoken to them, firstly, is privacy and surveillance, right? So this is the number one concern. So really, centralized or expansive digital ID systems can let governments or agencies track many areas of your life, including what, when, where, and how. And it rises the concern of having this big brother that's just constantly watching you. Now, I hear you, and I get it, and I am just as concerned with you. Now, people would say to that, yeah, but if you're not breaking the law, you should have nothing to worry about. Sure, get it. Understand that argument. I am someone who doesn't generally break the law, right? However, even though I don't break the law, doesn't really mean that I want Big Brother on my shoulder 24/7, right? That's just the reality. And the fact that someone not wanting that automatically means that they're guilty of something, I think that's a very naive perspective. Now, at the same time, we've also got to get in reality in the fact that if you have a smartphone, you're being tracked 24/7 regardless. And I don't really care what your concern is with surveillance. If you have a smartphone, I mean, I've got an Apple Watch on right now. So just between my phone, my laptop, and my watch, I've got 3 things that are constantly tracking me no matter what I want to do, right? So no matter where I am, no matter what I'm doing, no matter what conversations I'm having, I'm constantly being tracked. And if you have any smart devices around you or in your house, my friend, you are being tracked. So this idea that digital ID is going to be this thing that's going to be implemented to start tracking you, guys, you've missed the boat. You've been being tracked for about 10 years now, right? That is one of those concerns that you're going to have to just be aware of and just accept, right? Today, in today's day and age, most people have smartphones in their pocket. If you have a smartphone, you basically have not only all the information that's ever existed in the world in your pocket, you have a supercomputer. Notice how it's generally attached to the end of our hand at this point, right? I mean, and there is an argument to say that, your current smartphone is an extension of your body. We would be kind of toast without it. I do believe that. But the reality is, if you have a smartphone, you're already being tracked. So I think, standing here and saying that, there is this kind of surveillance and big brother element to what you're doing, guys, it's already here. I think that is very much a losing battle, considering it's already here, and you're starting to wake up and not want that. You've kind of missed the boat, right? And that's just the stark reality of the current situation today in 2025. Now, the second concern that people I've seen is the fact that when everything is centralized in a centralized framework, yes, it's protected in theory. But if you have some really sophisticated hackers who can break into that infrastructure, you have one point of entry and you can basically scalp everybody's information. This is the same reason why Optus, and there was another breach, I think by one of the insurance companies or something like about a year ago. It was all over the news. It happened with Optus as well, where someone would basically hacked into the Optus mainframe, and then all of a sudden a bucket load of their customers' data was then scalped and, released and sold to the world. So again, this is the problem when we have our information stored behind some kind of infrastructure. If everybody's data is centralized, you have one point of entry and you can access all of it. Now, in theory, it should be a virtual castle that they can't break into, but the reality is, with the way things are going, I would never say never when it comes to how far hackers will go to break into shit. The other risk when it comes to the fact that it is centralized is the fact that there might be sensitive information you don't want people knowing that can be broken into. So, for example, as you guys have probably noticed from listening to the show, I am one of the legal firearm owners in WA. All right. The last thing that I want is my firearms, the amount of firearms that I've got, the type of firearms that I've got, where they're getting stored. I don't want that stored in digital ID, because if someone breaks into that and can find out the weapons that I have, the location, the models, like, that's bad news. That actually increases my risk and my family's risk if that information was to go out there. So that is something that I think is extraordinarily dangerous if it gets into the wrong hands. And again, in theory, hackers can't break into it because the security is just way better. But as we've seen with multiple hacks over the last 18 months, never say never. Number 3, the third concern people have is function creep. All right. So again, at the moment, if we start with, let's just say, driver's license and passports and Medicare for that matter, all of a sudden there are 3 documents you no longer need because you've got your digital ID. All right. However, that's today. So as this technology continues to develop, I would imagine it's only, a matter of time until it starts taking over things like your banking. It starts taking over things like, for example, your shopping, right? And how you're spending money, where you're spending money, what information you need to prove that that money is yours that you can spend from your own digital wallet. This is where the conversation of central bank digital currencies come in. Things like travel. Obviously, when it comes to passports, the big one that people are afraid of is social scoring. So for those who don't know what social scoring is, again, this is one of those tinfoil hat conversations that I've been having for a number of years with certain people. There are multiple provinces in China, and there's a few places around the world where they have what's known as a social credit score. Now, a social credit score is basically a score you get like your credit file, but based on you and your behavior. So let's say, for example, you're someone who is caught jaywalking, right? Well, your social credit score comes down. If you get a parking ticket, it comes down. If you speed and get caught with your phone, it comes down. And so if you get to a certain score that's too low, you can't buy certain luxuries. So you can't buy movie tickets. You can't buy, you can't go and rent a hotel. You can't rent a car. You can't go and purchase plane tickets. So there is an element where as your score gets lower and lower and lower and lower, the walls metaphorically start closing in on your life and what you can do. Now, on the flip side, if you're someone who visits your parents regularly, your score goes up. If you pay bills on time, your score goes up. If you help people, it goes up. So there are ways and things you can do to essentially make your score go up. And again, as your score increases, then there's more things you can go and do. So you can go and get movie tickets. You can go and buy this. You can go and buy that. Right? Now, yes, for those who have watched Black Mirror, this is an episode of Black Mirror. Right? Ironically, I watched this the other night with my wife. And yes, when it comes to the stars that you are receiving, that is the exact same concept of what the social credit score actually is. Like I said, there are multiple places in China, multiple places around the world right now where they've actually already implemented social credit systems, and they're using them as pilots, and they want to be, sorry, let me take a step back. These are currently undergoing tests to see if it actually can work at scale across the world. Now, this is a slippery slope. Right, because this is one of those situations that once it comes in, I think we are going to have a hard time of getting it out, right? And not to say that it's a good thing or a bad thing, because once again, it is what it is. It's how it's used, right, and implemented. And this is where I think a lot of people have a lot of fear. Now, the main fundamental concern, and this is sort of working towards the main concern that people have. And this is really where it comes down to the question of use. Like, how is this going to be used and implemented? So like I've been sort of laying out so far, like the system in itself, digital IDs, the system itself is inherently neutral. Like, it's not a good thing or a bad thing. It's more about how it's going to be used. Now, the problem that we have is, and this really comes down to the problem of politics and the way that our current political structure is set up. Because right now we have two parties, Liberal and Labor, that are having this tug of war, and the party that gets the most votes, the most popular party, is the one that wins, and this is democracy. If 51% of people want it, they're the ones who are in power. The only problem that we've got is that as time goes on, the people in power is constantly changing. Now, once there is a framework like this that's been implemented, and there is a bad person who comes in power, this is when it can be abused very quickly. And this is fundamentally the concern. Now, just to make myself extraordinarily clear here, when it came to the last, let's just say the last election, right, here in Australia, right? We had Liberal and Labor. Most people didn't like Dutton because, and I saw all the Voldemort memes, and he's just this evil bloke with blah, blah, blah. And, a lot of it was the media kind of convincing you that, he was just this evil person who shouldn't be in power. So obviously, most people voted for Anthony Albanese, as it turns out. Now, as we've seen from the last, period with Albanese in power, we haven't exactly got the things that we were promised. And not only that, I think for most people, they feel pretty bloody jaded at the fact that, what he's doing in reality was different to the promises he made to get elected. Now, when it comes to, for example, the amount of taxes that we're paying, the increase in taxes that we're paying, the new taxes that they're now proposing, the fact that some of these taxes, if you are a politician, a judge, you're exempt. So he's making his friends exempt. And at the same time, we see what our taxes are getting for us, and it's actually getting a lot less than what we thought. Like, the reality is, this is a really good example of having really good intentions at the beginning, but then it turns into something that it really wasn't afterwards. This fundamentally is the fear of this system and digital ID. Now, fundamentally, the main concern is corruption, misuse, and authoritarian regimes that come into power. So what does it really mean? In less democratic or more repressive governments, digital ID systems can facilitate social control, repression, targeted surveillance, or denying services to dissenters. In other words, once we have CBDCs or central bank digital currencies and it's tied to digital ID, if you provide some kind of misinformation, which this podcast really could be considered misinformation to, the people who oppose this. If you say something along the lines of, I believe that there should be a two-state solution and that Palestinians should have some kind of home and land, that right now in Australia can be considered hate speech against, anti-Semitic. Essentially, this digital ID can pave way to a really dystopian future where dissent or any contrary opinion, at the flick of a button, they can start restricting your life and what you can access. Now, again, this is a fear. So this is a concern people have. Whether this concern actually comes to fruition or not is something a little bit different, right? But the fact of the matter is, this is my main concern. This is the main concern for most people, is that if I sit here and say, I think socialism is one of the best ways to destroy an economy, and then someone in power who is a socialist, which is our current government, if they believe that what I've just said is disinformation, at the flick of a button, they can prevent me from spending my own money at a grocery store. They can prevent me from buying movie tickets. They can prevent me from buying petrol at the petrol station. They can prevent me from buying whatever they want at the flick of a button, right? That is an extraordinarily scary future that we do not want to have, right? Because when it comes to the conversation of free speech, well, there is no free speech anymore. The people in power get to dictate what free speech is. You don't like it, all your shit gets cut off, right? There's other examples. And again, we can go down rabbit holes of what the extremes look like. But another hot and butt topic right now is net zero. Right. I mean, and obviously last week's episode about climate change, I think for some of the feedback we've gotten, it kind of hit home for some people. But look, the fact of the matter is, net zero and what they're really trying to do with net zero is an absolute con. In fact, one thing that I did say in the climate change podcast last week was the fact that there is an argument that Australia already is at net zero. Now, I was watching a video in Parliament yesterday of Senator Malcolm Roberts, so he's one of the Liberals over in Queensland, basically, and he came out with some data, and he said that if we want to hit net zero, we've already hit net zero. With the amount of trees and forests that Australia has versus the amount of carbon that we're producing, we're already producing 1/3 of what's being absorbed naturally from the trees that we have. So that just already tells you we're already at net zero, right? So for the Albanese government to turn around and say, hey, we need to increase taxes and implement all these, socialist policies and get ourselves to net zero by exporting a lot of our stuff overseas for them to go and, produce, with dirty coal and all the rest of it, for them to sell us back the energy. I think this policy is an absolute scam and literally one of the worst things that we could be doing right now to try and benefit, humanity. However, notice how this is what the government and anyone who has a counter argument, they're called crazy and try and suppressed. So the point is, if this digital infrastructure is implemented in the way that the powers that be want to, if you have a counter argument, despite how truthful it is about, say, the net zero policy, if the government deems that they don't like it, they can deem it disinformation. They can then flick it a switch. They can essentially control what you can and what you can't spend your money on as a punishment. This is a future I don't think any of us want. All right? So, this is part of the reality of the future of digital IDs. And this is part of the reality that I think that most of us need to be aware of. Now, just to be clear, I'm not saying everything that I've said today is an opinion. It's my own personal opinion, part of the fears that I've been hearing and seeing from people. I highly encourage you guys listening to debates about this stuff. I highly encourage doing your own research, look at your own information, and see, in terms, one, I don't think it's too late to kind of go against this. It's already here. I don't think it works for us to be constantly fearful or constantly over-optimistic. I think there needs to be a balance. At the same time, I do invite you to firstly reflect for yourself. Number one, do you want digital ID for you in your life to make your life easier? If you do, the second question that I would then pose to you, what level of control do you want the government to have on your day-to-day life? They're probably the two main questions to really ask yourself and really reflect on to make sure this is the right thing. Now, again, we are in a system where, we can't exactly go and change laws ourselves as a people. We can't exactly go and really protest that's really going to make much of a difference. There has to be a situation where we make the change that we want to see by the way that we vote. And then fundamentally, that's really what it comes down to. Now, I know for some people, they say that's too slow and, not really reliable. I get it. But that's the current framework we've got, right? I think sitting here and saying that we should do what Nepal has just done, I think is extraordinarily naive. I don't think that's the right thing to do. And I don't think that's a future that we really want. I mean, we can all sit here and say that, we need to replace the government and implement a better system. Sure, I somewhat agree to that. The method is how. I don't think going through a full revolution is really the way to go, right? I mean, too many people get killed. And there are much better and safer and more efficient ways for us to do that. So that us as a people, we get to live the future and our kids' future and our grandkids' future the way that we really want it. And that's fundamentally what our politics and really what our government is actually supposed to be doing. All right. Now, with that said, like I said, guys, digital ID is a tool. All right. It's not inherently good. It's not inherently bad. It's how it's used and the intent of how it's used, which is good or bad. It could be the next biggest step in convenience, or it could be the next biggest loss of privacy. Fortunately for us, we're on the front foot right now. Even the fact that we're listening and you guys listening to this conversation just proves that we're on the forefront. What it means is right now, you have the power to speak to your local MPs. You have the power to have your opinion and voice your opinion of how you want this to be implemented in the future. And that, guys, don't underestimate that power. That's all I can say. Cool. So that's pretty much for this week, guys. I hope you got value, and we'll see you next week.